Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Life on Mars episode. And in this one, we talk about community. We talk with Mark Birch from the AWS for Startups team, somebody I've known for a couple of years, although we've never met in person, but we've been following each other and tweeting at each other on Twitter and discussing community and metal, which is something that we will be talking about. Both things also in this episode. Mark is right now at Web Summit, one of the largest conferences for technology and startup around the world. And precisely, he had been walking around during the interview, so maybe the audio is not the best, but we heard so many wisdom nuggets. We heard so much, and we learned so much from Mark when it comes to community building, the roles of people who are the best to do community building. How can founders do community building? Why do corporations usually not get community and sponsoring? Why things go south? What to do when things go south and you're the community builder and you cannot let your community down? What have we learned? Because this is kind of like a two-way conversation. It's not so much of a traditional interview in the vein of the last event, the last episodes that we have been recording at Life on Mars. We're kind of like bouncing off ideas and of each other and saying like, look, I think this goes this way. Like I share our experience at Startup Grind and building community here locally in Barcelona. Because for those who don't know it, we started doing events some months, even a year before MarsBased was born. So even if MarsBased was officially incorporated in March 2014, we had been running an event here in Barcelona that was called the Startup Circle. Basically, and this is pretty deep lore, and only you have been listening to this episode will know about it. Maybe there's some references in our blogs from back then, back when nobody would read the MarsBased blog. But basically, we started in early 2013 having some sort of meetups, private meetups for our friends only, because we were working in the industry, in the consulting industry, where you're not allowed to have a second job, right? Because of contractual issues and things like that. So basically, I knew that some folks in my surroundings, some of my acquaintances and friends and other coworkers even, they were creating other businesses just as much as I was creating MarsBased back then, right? But we couldn't make it public. We couldn't announce it. We couldn't, you couldn't be seen working on it. So we were sort of on like stealth mode and under the radar for a year, working on the weekends and kind of like preparing the name, finding the naming, to building the website and whatnot. And what we did is we started meeting in my living room. It started, I think the first one, we had like 5-6 people, eventually grew to like 20 something people. Then we moved to other venues because it's not like my living room is not that large. And we started having this sort of Entrepreneurs Anonymous, right? Companies that were in stealth mode, but we wanted to share our miseries of being like super, super early stage companies that basically had no clients, but we struggled to find, the first client or a good lawyer or a co-working space or working methodologies. So we would sort of do a daily stand-up or a weekly stand-up, so to speak, to share all of our, things we had achieved and our miseries on the other hand, and kind of like crowdsource ideas or favors. Like, we're going to print some business cards. The more we print, the cheaper it becomes. Who else wants to join the pool and create the business cards with us? It's going to be cheaper for all of us. We were basically bootstrapping companies. That was called the Startup Circle, and it started sometime around 2013. It coexisted with Startup Grind in Barcelona because we brought Startup Grind in Barcelona in February 2014. And for a good while, almost a year, we had both communities going on. But eventually, I decided that, it made sense. We sort of had like the same values. Both were happening, both were a recurring event. Startup Grind was monthly. These other things, Startup Circle was happening fortnightly. And about like the same size of events. And why replicating things? Why duplicating things? And I was doing also like interviewing people. And, at a certain point in early 2015, we decided to merge both communities, right? I think we announced it on our blog, as I said, and that's how Startup Grind became a little bit bigger in Barcelona because we merged these two communities that were very similar, and they were, of course, overlapping not only in format and in structure, but also in some of the members. But it was good. It kind of like taught us as a company that community building was something really interesting, and it pays off. As a matter of fact, one of our key hires in the company, our tech lead, Oriol Collell, who was at the time CTO of Dinello, comes from that very first meeting from the startup circle. And other people we eventually ended up working with, also we found through that startup circle, or they were members of it. Like my co-founder for Startup in Barcelona, Carlos Cruz, I knew him from before, but he was one of the members of startup circle as well. And eventually we're like, yeah, what if we apply for Startup and we do something bigger? And so, that's how the story started. You know the rest of the story, but basically, that MarsBased, we're pretty focused on community. And we have been, it's something that pays off. That's something that's been working very well for us. It pays off because it keeps us hiring. It has given us clients. It's something that we're really passionate about, really works very well. We're encouraging other people to do it, but we understand that not everybody has got the time nor the resources to do it. So, we're pretty privileged in that. Without further ado, let's jump right into this episode. Mark, welcome to the show. Welcome to Live on Mars. How are you doing?
Doing well, Alex. How about yourself?
I'm fine. I'm really happy. I'm really excited that you're here because you're literally the first guest speaker that we have that is walking around a conference. So you're not only, you're technically not the conference, it's a pre-conference, right?
Yeah. The day before the setup, the final prep.
This is a web summit and you're in Lisbon. And how do you feel about being in, one of the first big conferences after the lockdowns and restrictions and whatnot? I assume it's not the first one you go to, though.
It's actually now will be the third. So I went to SaaStr in September.
All right, yeah.
That was 6,000 people, all outdoor. Then last week, I was in Portugal, for Been at Porto, a business innovation network event, which is a consortium of different universities. And so they asked me to speak on the topic of community, one of my favorite topics.
And that's why you're here, because I want to discuss some things about community, because I've been following you for a while. You do community at AWS, but you've had a very big line of jobs related to community. You've written a book. We're going to be talking about that as well. But how does that come about? Like, when did you start being into community? And back then it wasn't really called community, right? So when did you start? What's your background, and so to speak?
I generally start some of my talks with, I'm not a community builder. That's kind of how I felt for many years. And even now I feel a bit skittish about the term. So I think we've always had this community. Back in the days we had, meetups, we'd have events, we'd have groups, we'd have associations. These are all communities, right? There's not much different. And this is going back to way back in the days of humanity. We are social creatures. But yes, so community is a big thing. You hear about it. There's things like the community fund, community as a sector that VCs invest in now is super hot. But rolling back my own personal journey, I've been a failed startup founder. Total crash burn. I was building a super complex enterprise grade HR tech thing. And it was just a freaking dismal disaster. And that's a whole nother show potentially. But I emerged from the ashes of that, dead set on fixing my problems. And I knew that one of those was just I didn't have a network. I didn't have other entrepreneurs to lean on or ask questions of. I didn't have connections to the investor world. It was just I just felt very alone. And so I went on this mission to go on a meetup, at least one meetup every night for a year, excluding weekends. I gave myself the weekends off. But
wow.
So it was 250 plus events I attended. And I made it my mission just to meet one person, to build one good connection. But of course, like I go to these events, sometimes I go to 2 or 3 in an evening, and I met way more. And that kind of turned into a blog that I created that built up a massive audience because I just started blogging every day. I said, I'm going to put myself out there. So that was kind of step one, like to build my network and to build credibility. And then several years later, I became like an advisor to a lot of B2B tech founders in New York City. And they kept asking me the same questions about how to sell. So they looked at me like, oh, Mark, he's a founder. He actually did like sales for big companies like Oracle and Siebel, and he's a developer in his past days. Like he gets me. He gets like me. I'm an engineer. I'm a geek. I can't sell.
Yeah.
So he's going to teach me the way. So we get together. We'd have these coffee meetings, and then after like hundreds of these damn meetings where I'm advising them on the same damn things, I said, this is ridiculous. Let's all get together. We'll meet up. I'll invite some of my smart sales friends who've been there and done that, and they'll teach you. Like I'm stepping out, and they could help you out, and then you could help each other. And that was the start of this thing called at first the Enterprise Sales Meetup, and then it became the Enterprise Sales Forum. That started in one meetup every month in New York City, then became 2 groups, then became 3 groups, and then then it expanded nationally and then internationally. And before I knew it, I had this thing that was a community without me necessarily defining it as such. And we had volunteers, we had roles, we had a code of conduct and tenets, and like a whole system that I built out to try and manage this unwieldy thing of 30,000 plus members across 24 chapters. And that's when I guess I put on the community hat and started to own that mantle.
Okay, so it's kind of like that maybe explains quite like why you guys, at least at AWS or you personally, you get startup grind, because there's all of this community world, these chapters thing. But your story totally resonates with me, because when I started in the ecosystem in Barcelona, I had the same problem, right? I was not a founder, but I came from the let's call it the old school consulting world, where you were not allowed to go into like startup thingy, because then you were perceived as looking for another job. But when I quit that job, I had to go to meetups because I wanted to know people. And long story short, I moved to San Francisco, where I knew nobody for 3 months for my tourist visa. And I remember that there, my strategy was exactly the same. I was like, I'm gonna go to one meetup every night. I even went to the Beer Olympics, which had nothing to do with tech, but I wanted to meet people. So, all that story, just to sort of confirm that in order to create community, one of the things that you have really, you've hovered over it, which is kind of like, it's kind of passion, but also consistency. You said, I was attending meetups every night, I was blogging every day. What's your vision on this persistence and consistency in doing things day over day?
I gotta tell you, it's. I look at community like you look at startups, right? Like they kind of have the same trajectory, right? So we all know the curve when you're starting off, and it's super exciting. You're going up that ramp, and you're going, and you feel so excited. Yeah. But then, like you kind of hit like a plateau. Then things don't go so well, and you're like, holy shit, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And then you crash and burn, right? Yeah. And that's most people's journeys with startups and with community. But the thing I realized that you have to gut through the trough of sorrow. You have to push through, be persistent as hell, but also iterate. You got to figure out like what are things that are going wrong and what do I double down on things that are going right. So like a good example of that is the first city that I launched in was Boston, outside New York City. So go to Boston. First 2 events were great. Had about 60, 70 people at each. Like people were like super excited, like, wow, this is the best thing ever. Totally like sharing with my friends and my colleagues, and we're gonna bring out the team. The third event comes. I had a senior person. Yeah, the third event, we had 10 people, including our speakers.
What went wrong?
that was the thing. I couldn't really suss out. We had like the right type of speaker who was like at the head of like global enablement for HubSpot.
All right. Well, that's
like
one hell of a speaker.
Name.
Yeah.
And we had someone on the venture side who was going to interview this guest. And we had total no-shows.
Was it a rainy night or something? Or like there was like a big game at the same time?
The weather wasn't great, but still, it wasn't that. It's just going to happen. And I tell people that build anything, you're going to have these days, you can't explain it. It's going to suck. You're going to crash and burn. You're going to be embarrassed. You're going to want to put your head in the ground, dig yourself into like 10 feet under and never emerge. And that is the exact worst time to give up. Because now you're actually on the trajectory of figuring out how to get yourself up. So what I ended up doing, the fourth event was also a disaster.
All right.
We had like the wrong people. We had randos coming up. So I did two things. One, I started charging for the events.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to get rid of the randos. So I was going to curate it. Then I made special direct outreach to sales leaders to come attend the event, or at least let their teams know that we have this event going on. And I had social proof because I already kind of knew a lot of people in the Boston startup ecosystem. And then the third thing I did is I got someone who had a really big network. Like his whole deal was building networks. So I had him as my fifth speaker for that fifth meetup. And that combination brought 100 people to that event. Just attended an event.
And paid.
And then the trajectory, it took off, right? And that was the same story, whether we launched in Chicago. San Francisco is a different story. Everyone always came out for San Francisco, but like Seattle, London, Singapore. So we had that same curve. And so I tell every community builder, don't expect everything to be like roses. That's not, that won't happen. That is a complete outlier. You got to have the bumps to figure out how you optimize and how you build a community that people care about. And that's ultimately what you're doing. You're building something that is connecting people to something that's bigger than just yourself as a community builder. You're building towards a vision that people care about. You always got to ask, what's in it for me? And when I say to me, it's really that member that's out there that might be interested in the thing that you're trying to coalesce and put together to get them excited about it. So that is what you have to do in this journey of community. You got to be consistent, because if you're not consistent, you're gonna bow out well before you've had enough learning and enough conversations with your community to figure out what the special sauce is to double down and keep it going.
Well, but there's one thing here that you briefly mentioned that is like you had your downs, right? Like, there's bumps in the road, an event was a disaster, even your previous startup had failed. How do you find the motivation? Like, I don't know, like for me, it's one of the hardest things to do is to kind of like find a motivation to bounce back, especially because community takes a lot of time, like a long time to pay off. So you don't get immediate results. Even if you're doing events, your next event is 1 month away. Potentially, you will be stuck head down for 1 month before you bounce back and you have a successful event again. How do you motivate yourself?
I think that there's like a deep well inside of you, and if it's not for you, like it's easy to give up. And it was easy to give up on my last startup for a lot of different reasons. I just felt like we had built ourselves like too high and deep with the bullshit to be able to get beyond like our challenges, and there was no light at the end of the tunnel. The difference is when you really have that passion for what you're building. And what was different was like I approached this as a solo founder. Like this was my thing, and it was like my reputation, my credibility, everything that I am. I invested in it, and but it's a double-edged sword. Like you can do that, and you can still fail, right? So there's no guarantees. But I think what gets you through the trial of sorrow is if you have that, like you really do care about the thing that you're building, and you stick towards that vision, you will get through. But man, it is tough. Like I'm not gonna lie. I wanted to give up. I was I was like, screw Boston. Like, you don't deserve this. Right?
Yeah.
I think part of it is, I talked about that network before. Like, I had no one in my first startup. Like, I had no other entrepreneurs I could talk to. I was really out there on an island. The difference, like, fast forward 5 years later, I had a massive network, and I asked people, like, am I doing something wrong? Do I suck? Do I smell? Like, who knows, right? And they all said, no, Mark, man, like, you're doing an awesome thing. Like, you created this thing, and it's added so much value. Double down on that. And they gave me some pointers. Like the whole like direct outreach thing to sales leaders. That was a suggestion. Someone that reached out to me that I knew and said, "Oh, I love your enterprise sales forum." And we just had a conversation. He said, "Look, just reach out to people directly. They don't care. They'll love the fact that there's something that's there in the community for their reps to get excited about." Right. So I learned, and I built a way of kind of sussing out and getting like good, solid advice and recommendations to help guide me and to help keep me on the path. So I think whenever you hit that like that tough period of time, that's the time to like reach out beyond yourself. Don't put it all in yourself. Get some folks just like commiserate with, to just have some ideas to brainstorm.
All right. Yeah, no, that's a good point, because I was going to say, like, feedback, like, you don't live on feedback, man. I mean, even when you're feeling down and you're trying to look for advice to kind of like keep it going, you need some kind of external motivation. I mean, appreciation might be one, and there are some people that have got more ego, less ego, whatever. Money is another one. You launch something else and maybe like people start buying tickets again. Good, that's a good one, right? Or results. But basically the results in community, one thing that's really frustrating is that sometimes they take years to coalesce and not to pay back. We don't do it for the returns, right? But like, for instance, now I've been helping people for like 8 years building community in Barcelona. And maybe this year I've gotten something back from somebody who helped 8 years ago, right? It's like, wow. So in hindsight, it makes sense. Like, you would say like, oh, look at that. You've gotten this and that. But there are things that were years away or years apart from when you started. Definitely you didn't have this information. That didn't keep me going. Maybe it was something else, but like reaching out to other people and looking for advice, it might be something interesting. Who are the people you look up the most to in terms of community? What's your reference?
Well, what's my reference? You know what I think it is I realized like there's so much I didn't know about what the thing I was building. I didn't even like have a real name for it. It was only like a few years later that community became the word that I said, okay, this is what defines this thing I've been building. And also other things I've done in the past. That what I started to look at, funny enough, was Startup Grind. Like, so I was looking at what Dave was building with Startup Grind. I was like, wow, that's super inspiring. Like, he's got like all these folks like around the world that are passionate about startups, just like I'm passionate about getting people that want to learn and really excel at sales. Like, these are kind of like the same thing. Like, I should be like looking at what he's doing as like inspiration and maybe like a reference point. And obviously, like, where Startup Grind is gone from its very beginnings has been super inspiring for myself and for a lot of other community builders. I also looked at professional communities like Salesforce and what they did with Trailblazer. That was like phenomenal. Like, I never thought that like companies really could put that type of investment and that type of focus and with the execution and make a real community coalesce, and they did it. So I think you always just gotta look around and see what are people doing, not to copy them, but to get some inspiration, get some ideas. And it was only like many years later, I actually reached out to Dave directly and said, hey, like, what you built was so awesome. And I just wanted to say thank you for like building that out and, and giving me a lot of just support in my own journey. even though we never met directly.
Yeah, no, that's great. Actually, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I mean, because you're inside a big corporation, right? You work at AWS or Amazon for people who are not that technical, or one of the divisions of Amazon. And one of the things I like about AWS in particular, or Amazon, is like you get community right, like as opposed to many corporates, because I deal with corporates every day. I've got them clients at MarsBased, or they want to be my sponsors at Startup Grind, or they want to speak at our events, whatever. They want to engage. Most of them, they're like, how do I participate in this? I throw money into the community. That's how it works. And literally now we've taken the policy of not getting any kind of sponsorship unless we are friends with the company, right? And that's kind of how it came about with AWS at a global scale in Startup Grind, but also in the local chapter of Barcelona, right? And because we have had a relationship of quid pro quo for 2 years prior to the sponsorship. We helped each other, and then eventually we're like, does it make sense that we pay for the catering in the local events in Barcelona? I was like, could help, but I was really glad to accept that money instead of other companies, because other companies in the past, it failed miserably. Maybe they paid in time, they were great people, but they would just come to the event, they didn't connect to people, they wouldn't come to the event, they would just pitch stuff that was not relevant to the community. I don't know, man, what's broken in corporates? Why don't they get community?
The reason it doesn't work out is because the motivations, the values aren't aligned. Right? And that I learned really early on when I was taking sponsors for the Enterprise Sales Forum. There were companies that just wanted to buy their way in, get leads, or to make it like a big business proposition. They didn't actually have any thought in mind as to the value and the vision for what the community was all about. Like, I wanted people to come and get like super excited about speaking, getting involved, volunteering. And I didn't even care so much about the money. I was like, do you care about the future of B2B sales and for the development of salespeople to build, grow in their careers, to change the path of professionals that have no guidance, to having a community where they can get that guidance? So if you don't have that alignment of values, there's no point in talking. I'm like, thank you, but I'd rather just take this on my own. And glad for you to be part of the community, but I don't need your support.
Yeah, but sometimes you cannot take it on your own, or maybe I was the wrong person to start the community here, because I was broke as fuck when I started Startup Grind. Not saying that I sold my principles to the first sponsor that came, because for the first year we didn't have any sponsors. However, when you start getting into conversations at such a young age of a community, the sponsors, maybe they have 4 or 5 different options on the table, and they want to see some metrics, and they are incentivized to pick the best one in terms of metrics, not on values, because they want to get some results, right? Which is, but for me, it's the wrong approach. But go tell their bosses, who are going to judge their work based on the metrics of the events they're sponsoring, right? Yep. It gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, I'll tell you, it's not easy, right? And I tell folks all the time, you got to be financially responsible.
Great,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, just like with a startup, like this stuff doesn't come for free. So we definitely did take, I guess, sponsorships in kind. So we never paid for food and beverage. We never paid for space. And the quid pro quo was, okay, we're going to, invite a group of 100 salespeople, managers, leaders in your space. And you can get up there and say, hey, we have jobs available.
Yeah.
And that was incentive enough, right? So I think there's more creative ways of kind of structuring things that don't necessarily sell yourself out, that still align with your values. But the other thing I'd say is there were organizations that if you're doing the good work and people are seeing it and you're seeing that word of mouth spread, there's always those organizations that will look at that and they'll say, we want to be attached to that because it's bigger than just the leads. It's bigger than just the metrics. It's about associating our brand with a vision that we really care about. And that's what I mean by alignment of values. Yes, they do want to see some results, but the results are different than like pure marketing metrics, right? Like, so number of leads or, MQLs or all these other things, which I think are more appropriate if you're talking about an event, a conference, but not in the context of community. I think we need to look at different metrics for understanding the value that's being created in the community and how that could tie into and be of a benefit for other organizations that are tied to that community.
But how do you do it now that you are the one sponsoring? Like, do you understand better the particularities of sponsoring now that you're on the other end of the table? Like, you're now sponsoring events. You're right now at Web Summit. Probably that one is a one of a kind. Like, let's not discuss that one, but maybe you sponsor other like smaller meetups or groups or communities. What kind of metrics do you measure them against?
Yeah, some of them are very basic. We want to look at, how's the group or community growing? What's the engagement like? Are there any sort of outcomes or follow-ups that maybe extend into, different opportunities? So people wanting to become community builders or to apply to Heroes programs or to maybe there's a startup founder there or CTO and they sign up for Activate. So there's different outcomes that we can look at from a community perspective. They don't get so tied up directly in looking at community as a marketing vehicle. So, we do have to balance it out. We are a big corporation, but we have a broader view of the things that we expect when we engage at a community level. And you mentioned something about Web Summit. That's a little bit different because we look at that as an event. And so we do look at that from a marketing and branding standpoint. So we do want to know, are we driving like good quality leads? Do these leads result into downstream revenue? So that's important. But from a community standpoint, we know that that's more of an awareness mechanism. That's at the very top end of, like, we talk about marketing stuff, that's way top end of the funnel.
Yeah.
That if we do enough of that, then results happen. We do see outcomes. And we know that's a fact because we see that in the work that our developer advocates do. And developer advocates, like, why is like developer advocacy like this big thing now? Because companies understand that if you're not fostering and feeding a community, then you're losing out on influencing those decision makers. In this case, developers who are making decisions on developer tools and cloud platforms. So AWS, obviously, we've invested in this advocacy type of motion for over a decade now, ever since like Jeff Barr was our very first developer advocate. So that's kind of how we look at the difference between like events or conferences and our involvement in community. And oftentimes our community involvement, it's a very light touch. We don't go in and tell our user group leaders what to do, but we'll provide speakers, we'll provide sponsorship, we'll provide support, we'll help them out if they have questions about how to grow their community. So there's a lot of like this back-end support that we provide to help out our user group leaders in building out their own communities and to foster that and to see it grow and become healthy. Because obviously, again, like, we care about that. We care about the growth and health of communities long term.
And I tell you, man, like, there's something I really like about it. Not only you personally, but like the rest of folks working at AWS, is that you travel to the communities, like you travel to the conferences, to the events, to the meetups, and at least people in Spain, people in Barcelona, they're really helpful in our event. But they come, like if they're in town, they just come to the event. They just want to meet people, but for no particular reason, right? And so you're doing it. You were at SaaStr, you mentioned. You're here. You're probably planning your conferences for next year. What part of it is it like for me? I don't consider myself a community builder, right? Might be community leader, maybe, but I build community. But my main job, as I'm the CEO of a fucking company. However, I understand the value of community because I also spend a lot of time going to places and going to conferences because I know I don't want to feel like the grassroots feeling of when I started. So literally every year I go to Web Summit, every year I go to Start Grind, every year I go to this conference because I don't want to lose the touch or the feeling with the first-time entrepreneurs, the feeling of first time being in a conference and whatnot. What part of it do you think it defines the role of a community builder?
I think there's different aspects to it. I always think that there's the person that's a catalyst, right?
Yeah.
So they get the spark going, and they'll generally be seen as the founder. But there's also other people that are very important for the development of a community, and over time there's going to be different roles that evolve. And so when I was building out the enterprise sales forum, it started off as just myself, and then I had chapter leaders, and then we realized we needed like a little bit more things to do, and we had more to manage. So we had someone that would help with promotions, with sponsors. I look at all those folks as community builders. So I don't look at community building as a single role. It does start off in the beginning, just like you're sharing with me. Like you're kind of like you feel like you're the lone gun, going out there, putting it all on your back, all on yourself. But eventually, you got to have a team. It's got to be community builders. But I think if you have that passion, you're making it happen. Like people see that. It's like this magic. It's like an aura that happens that people are attracted, and they want a part of that. The downside of that is there's a lot of people that might be attracted, but when they realize the work that's involved, they'll kind of fade away. So there's also another careful thing is that you're going to have community builders, and then you're going to have community hanger-oners who want to be involved, who want to be important. They want all the recognition, but they don't want to do the work. And the thing I always say about community building and startups is you need doers. You don't need talkers. Talkers, like you can join a think tank or join a consulting company or join like some big, huge enterprise. But if you actually want to do stuff and get stuff done, you need other doers around you. I think that's also a little bit of the DNA of AWS, is that we are like this culture of doers. Yeah, we do strategy, we do think, but ultimately it comes down to driving results. So in the same way, like that, you have to think about that from a community standpoint.
Yeah, because like all the people I've met at AWS or Amazon per se is like they're ex-founders, like they're former founders, and maybe that gives you a different understanding. Like for instance, the thing I was mentioning, probably the difference between me or you and another community builder from another corporate is that we have been founders, so we understand the pains of starting up. But also, like the difference between you and I is like that doesn't really scale. In my case, there will come a day, maybe, in which I will have to have a team. In your case, that's your role full time, right? In my case, it's like that's a small part of what I do as a CEO because I got a team of 25 people and I got to take care of them, right? So eventually, the CEO must delegate this community building to somebody else. What's the right time, do you reckon, for a CEO to kind of like step down from this, or maybe there's no right time for it?
I don't know if you ever really stepped down. It's hard, right? I tried. And part of it is because you're established as the leader or the founder, it's hard for other people to kind of look at someone else to take that on. And I don't really think that works in the short term. Long term, if we're talking about like years, then I think people understand that like things change. But you got to build up that core. You got to build up the root of the community, which is those people are super passionate like yourself. And you start to work with that, the folks that are part of that root to see, okay, who has the DNA, like I have the DNA, to continue on, right? And this is like simple like theory of succession planning. how do I fire myself? And I started to think about firing myself early on in the communities that I've built. So I know it's not sustainable. Burnout is the number one cause of communities dying.
Burnout of the leader or of the community itself? All right.
Burnout of the leader. Because once the leader gets burnt out, it's almost like the spark gets let out of the community. And if it happens too early on, that's it. There's nothing to sustain. But you look at communities that have continued on, that have that 5, 7, 8, 10-year span. And the thing you'll notice is that they have not just one person that you can look to, but they have lots of different people that are all part of making that community happen. But you got to start early on thinking about who's going to be that core, and thinking about who can replace you when you fire yourself.
Right on. I totally hear you, because that's one of the things that have been, I've never felt like completely burnt out from Startup Grind, and that's something I've been doing for almost 8 years now. But there's come a couple of times in which I was like having a second thought about it, right? And maybe replacing myself, maybe bringing and I kind of think of a lot of things. Maybe it's like at one particular time we kind of like changed the entire team, and that worked. There was another time in which I took a couple of months off and I had the team just work on it because we didn't want to lose. We've never missed a month in our monthly event since February 2014. And I didn't want to break that record. So I said to the team, can you take care of this for 2 months? I'm going to be away. And I came back stronger than ever. But I was never really close to burnout. What are your tips for avoiding or preventing burnout in community building?
Something you just said, take time off. Just take time off. Like, the world is not going to fall apart on you if you are not there for a month or two. Right? Okay. But you got to give them the agency to make decisions without you. That's the first thing. The second thing is you got to prepare the foundation. So one of the things that was core to one of the things that I did to kind of pass off the leadership mantle was I created an operations document that explained, okay, this is how we run the community. This is what you need to know. Now, my doc was a bit lengthy. It was like 18 pages or whatever. But it worked. Okay. Because it had everything. Right? You can have like the short version, like this is how I just get things going. Like boom, here's like the 3-page checklist. Do all these things, or at least do most of it, and you'll be fine. And all right. You can go on autopilot, right? So I think it's 2, right? 2 things.
Taking time off.
Take time off, but also give people agency to make decisions, and give them something to work on or to work with, so they're not flying blind and then having to go back to you. That's for you, for your advice, or for you to make a decision. When you step out, your goal should be to not make a single decision. Do not make decisions, just no. No. Do not answer your phone calls. Do not answer your text messages. Ignore the emails. You gotta let people fly.
That's a good one. Let's jump into some quick fire questions to kind of enter the last block of the conversation. I wanted to get some funny stories. You're a well-seasoned entrepreneur and community builder, but what's the biggest fuck up you've ever done in community building?
Well, besides having less than 10 people come to an event in Boston, that had a senior HubSpot exec, but
yeah. Was there something really expensive where you squandered a lot of money, maybe a sponsorship, something for something that you did, where you fucked up?
There are definitely big mess ups. I think sponsorships was a tough one for us. Yeah. We had signed an agreement with WeWork where they would host all of our events for us. Yeah. But then the management of that became so overwhelming between all different chapters and chapter leaders, and then the people on the WeWork teams that were totally discoordinated and didn't know what the terms of the deal were, that it just became a freaking nightmare. But that wasn't a singular mess up. That was just a very strained relationship for the year that existed. Yeah. But the one thing that really does come to mind, and it's quite relevant for this thing that happened last month. So every October is Women in Sales Month.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not a lot of people necessarily recognize that or know how it started, but that's just what it is. Just like every calendar has every month has some number of things. So October became Women in Sales Month. Well, why did that become a thing? So when I launched the Denver chapter, and this was something that was generally the case for all of our chapters, but the makeup of every event was 90% men, 10% women.
Even in
Same in Denver. Yeah. It was total male dominated. And people are generally cool though, but there was definitely not a lot of women. And I thought that was disconcerting. But it definitely came to a head when we launched the Denver event, and afterwards I got feedback that the women that were at the event were harassed by two particular gentlemen. So I immediately went on the warpath. I banned them for life. I basically, you two are gone. I was super apologetic to the women that attended. Some did come back. Some were just I'm out.
Yeah.
But I made it my mission to change that. So I decided to call women sales leaders, explain what we're trying to build in terms of the vision of building an open and inclusive environment, and really to elevate the voice of women in sales. And that's when I had the idea, why don't we just have a whole month where it's just sales leaders, female sales leaders, sharing their stories, what they've learned, lessons, their expertise, and we're just going to lift them up. And that's became Women in Sales Month. So what started as a real, it was just a horrible feeling. That was probably the lowest point in time I've ever experienced with the Enterprise Sales Forum. Because that just that hit me at the core of the values I espouse.
Yeah.
And I said, I can't have that. That's a non-starter. So kind of took that and said, okay, let's turn this totally around and make it a positive. But yeah, that was probably my lowest moment in community building.
Right on. No, but you did the right job. I mean, I don't feel it was your fuck up. I feel it was those two people that were harassing. But anyways, you did the right job there. What is I wanted to get this, bounce this off you because I know that you're an extreme metal lover. So you're really a lot into music. And I feel I get some of the best ideas I have for community building, my events, the setup, the everything we do, how we welcome the speakers on stage with a rock song and rockstar applause and all of that from metal and from music. I could write a book about it, but I want to hear your ideas. What have you learned from music that you're taking into community building? Because definitely, if there's community builders out there, those are the musicians.
By the way, look at the shirt.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah! All right. I didn't say it before. Yeah.
One of the,
right on.
The core thrash metal bands out of New York City.
All right. Yeah.
So something that some folks don't know about me is that I used to have metal bands back in the day. I played lead guitar, backup singer. Definitely more on the extreme end for some of these bands. And in fact, depending on how much of a geek you are, you may get a kick out of the name. The name of our band was called Grep.
What?
Grep.
Grep.
Grep as in a Linux command. Grep.
Okay. All right. That's a pretty nerdy name, though. Yeah.
But the funny thing is that our crowd had no idea what that name stood for. They just said, "You're Grep. That's so metal."
Yeah.
So, any case, so what did I learn from metal? Or just music in general? I just think that there's an incredibly creative aspect of what we do. Right? And if you always think about it just as the science, the procedures, the formulas, there's no life. There's no energy. The energy comes from the creative side. And so anything, if you are really a builder, whether it's communities, startups, software, it comes from a place that there's no formulas, there's no science, there's no algorithms you can build for that. That's a innately human experience, and that is what drives the passion for creating anything. Whether it's Leonardo da Vinci and all the incredible things he created, whether it's like a Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, they poured themselves into creating something because they had a passion, they had a vision, and there's a creativity that it's just hard to tap into or understand that we all have innately. It's just that you need the opportunity, and you need to believe in yourself to let that go. And that's kind of what for me, being a musician, having a band, that was my release. And that got me to really think about like not holding back.
Totally spot on. Like for me, there are three things that I've learned from music that I take into community building, which one of them is like build a great brand, because most bands that are famous have got a great brand, right? It's memorable. Yep. Second is have a great leader. People think about the front man, but usually it can be like the guitarist, or it can be the bass player, it can be also the leaders of the bands, right? And the third one is the consistency. Like I also have a band, and you know that you have to play even venues for 5 people and concerts for like 6 people, and then maybe you'll get to 10, and then you'll get to 12, and then you'll get to 20, and then you'll go back to 10. That consistency we were talking about before, I think that's also like most bands do. Even when they grow larger, maybe there's a band from New York City that gets a little bit big, comes to Europe, and the first 20 concerts are like 10 people, right?
Yeah.
Because they have to open for a greater act, and this other band have got audience, but their fans are not interested in the opener, which would be your band. So you get to play for nobody, maybe for only the bar people or something like that, right? So I don't know. That's why I wanted to get your ideas on that, because I know that you're super passionate about music, and for me, like I copy stuff from the things I see in concerts, like the user experience, or what we call the attendee experience in our events, right? It's like, well, we want to see some encore going on. We want to see some music being played before the show starts. We want to see people welcoming the speaker with a rock star standing ovation, right? Not only at the end of the show, but at the beginning of the show too, because that gives audience. I want to drop some F-bombs and some jokes during the sets so that I get the people attention, because people attention decreases over time, right? So all of these things, I think there's some sort of science over there, but enough of like some sciencey thing is there any couple albums you want to recommend to our audience before we wrap this up?
Oh yeah, no, it's just
I don't get to speak about metal very often on this show, so
Yeah, no, there's like so many things going on music wise. I think it's like one of those years which has been like a bit of a renaissance for metal.
Yeah,
I think just like overall like an awakening for just a lot of musicians that are coming out of COVID, thinking like, wow, like this is like a new birth, a new opportunity. So, but of my favorites, like this year, the Gojira Fortitude album.
Yes.
Is just like by far and away my favorite. I've been listening to that like just nonstop, and there's like others that came out. Who was that? Like Machine Head coming out with something which I thought was pretty killer.
Yeah, it was an EP. It was a short EP, but it was amazing. Best stuff they've done in years.
Oh yeah, I mean that was like way better than anything they've done in the past decade. Yeah, Architects, great album. Great album that they released. Got so many.
The new Trivium.
Trivium, that's right. I listened like the first 5 songs. I got to listen to the rest of the album later this week. But I was like, wow, that was super awesome. But yeah, Gojira is still going to be one of my core favorites.
Yeah.
Close to the heart. Also, Mastodon, their new album. There's some good stuff there.
Is it already out? Because I haven't seen it.
Oh, you gotta check it out.
All right.
Yeah, Mastodon.
Yeah, I'll do it right after this. Great. Just one last question, Mark. We always wrap up with a signature question at start, Brian. I know this is not start, Brian, but I want to ask it to you because I've got the feeling that you will have a very good answer for this. Everybody has got a useless superpower, something that's fucking useless, but you do it every day. Very, with a lot of precision. And you're like, what do I do this for? What do I know this for? Right? Do you have any useless superpower?
I think my useless superpower is useless knowledge of historical dates.
Great, such as?
It just, I'll come up with something in passing. Like someone will say something like, oh, when did that happen? Like the Battle of Hastings. Oh, 1066. And I don't know why I know this stuff. The same thing will happen with geography as well. Like people ask me like, oh, what's the capital of Jordan? I'll be like, oh, that's Amman.
All right. Right on.
It's just like just useless vats of knowledge in my head that probably just like crowding out everything else that would be more useful. But there you go.
It would have been useful. It would have been useful back when there was no internet, right? And you had to go and look it up. Now that we've got like all of this information in our phones, it's kind of like useless. So I agree. Go on, man. Thank you very much for your time. Love the chat. I'd love to see you in person one day. So we'll meet in a conference sometime soon. So thank you. Enjoy
the conference, and we'll find a time to jam.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, Mark. Enjoy Web Summit. Thank you very much.
All right. Later, Alex.